Last week's episode, I talked about the pain of not feeling like you belong in community. And I wanted to expand about that. And so this week, I'm going to be speaking about how to make individuals, especially neurodivergent individuals, disabled individuals, people who are often left out of community, how to make them feel like a part of your community and welcoming. And it goes far beyond saying, hey, we're an inclusive group, or hey, we're an inclusive community, or our goal is to make everybody, feel nice and comfortable. Because saying those words is one thing. Doing the actions, taking the steps necessary to actually put them into place is something that, let's be honest, a lot of groups and a lot of individuals just aren't willing to do. So let's dive deeply into this Pride episode and talk about how to make our spaces much more welcoming for neurodivergent and disabled individuals. You're listening to Feather Mane Soul Wisdom, a podcast for those looking to rediscover their wild spirit in spite of life's challenges. If you're living with a chronic illness or neurodivergent or consider yourself disabled and you're looking to connect with your own inner untamed essence, then this show is for you. Your host is Kit Kelsto, Wild Spirit Storyteller. Thanks for listening, and now on to the episode. Hi, I'm Kit Kelsto, your host for the Feather Mane Soul Wisdom Show. And you know what? I'm just going to be really honest and really transparent up front. I have reached a stage in my life that, whatever shreds or faint hints of a filter I had as an undiagnosed and then diagnosed autistic individual, those little wisps of a filter that I held on to for most of my life, they're gone. I'm sorry. I have reached the stage of life where the field in which my F's are grown is barren. It doesn't grow them anymore. And I have to admit, it could be the past 18 months or so. Possibly the past 10 years or so. But especially the past couple of years, I guess I used to be a really happy, bubbly, optimistic, we're all in this together type person. And I would like to still be that type of person. But I also have had some stark awareness about humanity and community and people that are in it. And honestly, I blame my undergrad in psychology, because sitting through 2 years of classes that basically tell me that I'm the one with deficits, that I'm the one that isn't, I'm the square peg that's not fitting into their round neurotypical hole, that was a weird analogy. I'm sorry. But, basically being told for 2 years that I was the problem when it was very clearly, I don't know, the professor that allowed really rampant transphobia in their capstone class that was supposed to be all about cultural sensitivity. Yeah. So I want this episode to be constructive. I want this episode to be something that people can take away, tidbits of information from, or maybe that they can look more deeply into their hearts, look more deeply into their groups, their organizations. But I'll be honest, my autistic pattern recognition tells me that we're on our own, my friends. We cannot rely on other people to create space for us. And maybe that's the whole message of Pride. Pride is when, as a queer individual, you step forward and you say, I am proud. I am who I am, and I am proud of that. And I am. I mean, I really don't want to diminish that in any way. And so when the world doesn't make space for you, you have to make space for yourself. And so, while yes, I'm going to spend this episode talking about the different ways that organizations can work to be more inclusive, can help make sure there is space for everybody and everybody feels like a part of the community, I also think we have to be aware that we have to make space for ourselves. Maybe I'll do, maybe I'll do another Pride episode next week and talk about that. We'll see. But let's just recap a little bit the reasons why individuals may not feel comfortable in groups or feel like they're a part of the community. If you are neurodivergent, and that is a broad umbrella, I'm not just talking about autism, ADHD, and AUDHD. There is a vast list of diagnoses that people could have that would be indicating how their brain works. That, could be a traumatic brain injury. Complex PTSD is considered a divergent neurotype. Tourette's, depression, anxiety, all of that, there's a huge list of conditions. There's no way I could list them all. And if your brain does not work the way that culture or society expects, then you're going to feel left out. And if you're not aware that that's why you're feeling left out, as many undiagnosed neurodivergent individuals do, then, that's going to compound that, because you're going to feel left out of community and you're not going to know why. So organizations, what can you do to help individuals who are neurodivergent feel welcome and wanted? And that wanted is the most important part here, I think, of this discussion, because it's hell to feel like you're not wanted in a group. Trust me, you're not alone in that. What can an organization do to make somebody feel wanted? Well, first of all, is respect everybody's lived experience. If somebody tells you something isn't working, don't dismiss it as just them. If somebody actually has the strength, the executive function, the strong feeling to speak up about something, that should be listened to. And if it is an accessibility thing, such as a sensory issue, if it's a way somebody's acting, it should always be examined. And is this a valid concern? Is this something we can take action on and not just dismiss it because of who it's coming from? Likewise, if you have somebody come into your organization that has experience that differs from a large group of people in the organization. So since this is a Pride Month, it would be if your Pride group is primarily local individuals who are gay, who are lesbian, who are transgender, if an asexual or an agender person comes into your group, don't dismiss their concerns when they bring them up just because they're not the same as everybody in the group. And we see this sometimes in the queer community with agender people, with bisexual people, with people whose gender and sexual orientation do not align with kind of, what the media tells us that Pride should be or group should be. The other thing should be, if you do group activities together, make sure expectations are clear. A great example is the meme I've seen going around where, a bunch of people are invited to a picnic and the person running the picnic says, "No, I don't need to bring anything. It's all good." And the person who took that literally shows up without anything because they were told it's good, it's okay, you don't have to bring anything when everybody else does. And then that makes them feel left out. And then they're like, hey, why didn't you bring anything? And the person says, well, you told me not to. I didn't mean that. Don't do that. Mean what you say what you mean. Make clear expectations, clear directions. And with those clear directions, if you're making a group decision, make sure that every voice is heard. And if you have somebody in the group that is going, whatever the group wants, whatever you say, make sure they get a say in things too. Because quite often the person that defaults to, whatever you want, you know best, it's okay, I'll do what you want. Usually they're defaulting. If that becomes a default for somebody, that's usually a fawning behavior. And that's an indication that there is trauma, that person either has trauma in their past and that's how their neurotype or their brain works, or that they are not feeling comfortable and safe in the group to speak up with their needs. I want to shift gears a little bit to disability. Disabilities aren't just needing a mobility aid such as a cane or a wheelchair. Disabilities aren't just visible. There are a large number of invisible disabilities. And regardless of whether a disability is visible or invisible, your abilities vary on any given day. And I think that's something we can all agree on, regardless of whether society considers us disabled or not. That one day you wake up, you have a lot of energy, you can do things. The next day you wake up, and well, to use the Southern term, you feel like a can of busted biscuits. The other thing about disabilities is that you've got to keep in mind the models of disabilities. Some people are disabled because there is a medical condition causing the disability. Some people are disabled because society has disabled them. Society has blocked them access. Society has blocked them the ability to go about their life. And so to tie that back into like the neurodivergent individuals, as somebody with a neurodivergent brain, my brain is operating the way that my brain operates. There's nothing wrong with how your brain operates. However, society is disabling because society has created rules and structures and expectations that do not match well with my brain. And society and culture is all built around the neurotypical brain. And so society, that's the societal disabling. Societal disabling would be a church, for example, without a wheelchair ramp, or a church without the ability for an individual using a wheelchair to receive communion at the altar. To use a couple of examples from my education. Society can disable in that way. And so when you have disabled individuals in your group, and I want to be clear, disabled is not a bad word. There are language preferences among different groups, but personally, I don't consider disabled a bad word because, as I just got done explaining, sometimes it's not me that's disabled, it's society. And so with that, it includes or involves a little more conscientiousness and a little more care on your organization. If you're a small group, maybe even as much as a dozen people, you probably know most of the people in the group. So it's no big deal to know, okay, I know this member of my group. I know that they sometimes have days where they're not able to walk very far. Let's make sure we can accommodate this person in our gathering or in our event. No problem at all. So a good example would be a pride parade. And, making sure that this person can participate on a float, for example, or in the back of a truck, sitting down, however that works, for your particular parade, but making sure the person can be comfortable, can be safe while participating and still feeling like a part of the event. In other words, like the other part of that would be, don't have everybody walking and then have just this one person sitting in a chair. Have a small group of people on the float sitting down, have some on the float standing up if there's room, if it's safe, have some people, walking around passing out candy. Whatever you wish to do for your event, make sure that that person is not singled out in any way. The other thing I would say is, if it's a larger group, simply be aware that you may have people attending that are not able to participate in a certain manner. Again, no judgment calls. There's no right or wrong. But if you're a larger group where not everybody knows everybody, or you're not on such close terms with everybody, somebody may not disclose, "Hey, I have an invisible disability." Now me, I'll disclose it, but not everybody does, and that's their choice. And so you want to make sure that you are creating an event, creating a space where people with energy limitations, with sensory issues, with mobility issues, can actually participate in the event and yet feel safe. And so when you put those two pieces together, the bottom line, the best way to have people, to include people and bring people into your community, is to simply be considerate of other people, to honor other people's lived experiences, and to really just put yourselves in the shoes of other people and other situations that you may not have experienced. And this, to me, goes hand in hand with leadership. And so if you have the leader of a group that's basically saying one thing, and yet members of the group are feeling like what that person's saying is not being followed, then that really does not, then that does not indicate good leadership. A good leader needs to be able to look at things from multiple points of view, and needs to be able to accept different lived experiences and different people's experiences, even if everybody is doing the same thing at that same moment. Because we don't know sensory issues, sensory differences. Nobody knows what another person can experience. There are no lights that flash on your forehead when, like, the lights are too bright, or the background noise is too loud, and maybe somebody with an auditory processing issue is having difficulty with that conversation because the band music is too loud. You don't know what other people are going through unless they tell you, and if they don't tell you, then you need, a good part of good community is making sure everybody feels included and everybody feels involved. And so the last thing I want to leave people with today is that even if somebody doesn't speak up, not speaking up doesn't mean that things aren't happening. What that tells you is that you've created an environment where somebody doesn't feel safe speaking up. And usually these people will just go away. They'll just drift out of your group, and the group will go on being inaccessible, or the person will still stay a part of your group and just fade to the background and no longer do anything with the group, or try to do very little as possible. And that's going to be a clue that the group is not accessible. Now, I want to spend just a little bit of time here at the end of my podcast. Why am I having this conversation? Because This ties into grief coaching. This ties into yoga philosophy, the, ahisma, nonviolence, do no harm. This ties into the natural world. This ties into everything. And so just because this is maybe a little bit less spiritual, a little bit less esoteric of a show, doesn't mean that it does not apply to the work that I do. What it means is that this conversation, I think, needs to be had at this moment in time, because there's an awful lot of people feeling left out of an awful lot of spaces. And there's things happening, again, I'm in the US, there's things happening on the federal level that are drastically impacting certain marginalized communities that people not in those communities have no clue that this is going on, and is eugenics, is genocide, is not good. And so the one thing I would say is that if we start thinking about our community and thinking about reaching out to others in our small community, whatever your group is, a book club, a pride organization, a after school gathering, whatever that community is, a fan club of some sort, a group of people that meet at a coffee house on Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, your church or religion, whatever organizations, whatever communities you're involved in, even beyond Pride, if you start to think about how can I make this better for neurodivergent people, for disabled people, for queer people, for people from the global south, when you start thinking about that, then when you start thinking about that, you make that space a little bit better, and that eases the pressure on those communities and helps them feel a little more wanted. So I guess this falls under, my thoughts of just be kind. It costs you nothing to be kind. It costs you nothing to say, hey, we have created this event. Does anybody see any problems with it as far as including other, groups of individuals, as far as including some of our people who may have, mobility or disability issues? It costs you nothing to be kind. And so I think that is a good place to leave this Pride episode. And we'll see about next week's show, if maybe I can talk a little bit more on the subject as I mentioned at the first of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like or follow wherever you're hearing my voice. And this is on the Muse Charmer Media Network, and stay tuned because there's some exciting things happening on that network, and I hope you'll join us there. Thank you. You've been listening to the Feather Mane Soul Wisdom Podcast, hosted by Kit Kelstow. Learn more about Feather Mane Soul at feathermanesoul.com. As a wild spirit storyteller, Kit is passionate about helping those who are neurodivergent, disabled, or living with chronic illness rediscover their own inner wild spirit. Visit feathermanesoul.com to receive free gifts or book a free call with Kit to discuss how wild spirit storytelling can help you. Music is Running with the Horses by Purple Planet Music. This podcast is hosted on the Muse Charmer Media Network. Find out more by visiting feathermanesoul.com/show and following the links to the Muse Charmer Network. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow wherever you're hearing my voice, or tell a friend who may be interested. Thank you.